Okay, thank you for that introduction. Warning, there'll be no science and there'll be precious little horticulture in the next 15 minutes. There will be some pictures, there'll be some politics, hopefully there'll be a bit of passion as well, because my brief is community and social benefit, and that's what those things are all about, to my mind. And on that note, I want to start just with a little diversion immediately into a little public-facing campaign that we did over the summer, just a little test and learn thing that our organisation did, which was about trying to get people to tell us about a green space or a bit of green infrastructure or a park that actually mattered to them in an emotional sense, mattered to them because of what they do there, what they have done there, what they think about that place. We wanted to try and connect with people emotionally and see if that provoked a response. This is mine. I entered the fray as well. So this is Bolventure Park, which is a classic Victorian endeavour in Lancashire mill town. I grew up 2 streets away. My parents still live 2 streets away. It's the first place I head with my kids when I go visiting. And just about every formative experience of my childhood can somehow be traced to a tree, a bush, a pond, a swing, somewhere in that park. Some good, some bad, but I learnt from them all, and that's the important bit. This is what it's looking like now. The good news is it's bearing up pretty well. It's still got a number of features, a lot of interest. It's still cared for, not by professionals, but by amateurs. So there's a very active friends group. My dad chairs the friends group. But what I see increasingly as I go back there and walk around that place is that how much more of a struggle it's becoming. It's becoming much more of a struggle for resources, for volunteers, for skills, and that's only going to get harder by everybody's reckoning. And I think I talk about that just because I think it's quite emblematic of what's going on and the challenges we face in sustaining the huge benefit to communities and society that this kind of green infrastructure brings. What I'm not going to do is dwell on all of that benefit. I think it's all been proven time and time again that being close to a good quality green space makes you happier, makes you healthier, aids social cohesion and integration, helps tackle crime and antisocial behaviour, all of that kind of stuff. The evidence base is there. And not so very long ago, government departments and their agencies were falling over themselves to try and claim that benefit and be part of that debate and try and drive forward progress on that front. And there were hundreds of millions of pounds of lottery money going into the same system, trying to deliver those same kinds of social and community benefits. That's not happening anymore. As we know, policy responsibility for this kind of stuff is being actually passed around like a hot potato instead of being fought over. No one wants to claim responsibility for urban green space in central government at all. Funding is by and large focused on generally small-scale innovation and how to scale that all up. What is good is that more people are beginning to understand and recognise what might be lost if we don't do something about this from a community perspective. So that's leading to the formation of professional lobbies, as we know, to public campaigns by organisations that may not have campaigned on this previously, and interestingly by new policy research, whether it's on the right in the Policy Exchange or the left of the Fabians. They both produced reports recently saying this stuff's quite important to people, this stuff matters, politicians have exited the stage, therefore we need to somehow mobilise people to care about that again and to campaign about that again. So again, I won't dwell on all of this because I think it's been well rehearsed, but from a community perspective, what's going on? The parks picture has been well articulated time and time again, characterised by conversations around cuts and rising concern. The hope that will drive innovation, but I think still at this point in time it is a hope, and there's a fear of quality declining on the other side of that coin. If you look at the kind of less formal community green space sector, that doesn't really have a name outside of parks. So it's the other bit of parks and green spaces. My sense is that this is still very much dominated by passionate individuals, committed groups, reliant on grant funding. That still is the dominant modus operandi of this sector. Now, there are some great examples of people seizing the initiative and trying new things, radical ideas, shares and assets, and all that kind of stuff is being tried and tested. But I go back to the previous one. Generally, it's at pretty small scale, pretty localised, and only in certain parts of the country, generally where people have time, expertise, support, and money. And it doesn't happen quite so much in other places. There's a broad brush generalisation, I know, but by and large, I think it holds. So if we're going to try and find a way through and try and understand how we maintain all of that fantastic social and community benefit, I think one place to start is looking at it through various different lenses and the different perspectives that people have on this idea of social and community benefit of green infrastructure. So I think central government and the policy around this at the moment, the policy around communities at the moment, because there is no policy around green infrastructure really. There is no policy around urban green space, but there's policy around communities. And all of this language is in play, whether on the right or on the left or somewhere in the middle. And it by and large points to the same stuff, which is a narrative about devolving decision-making down to the lowest possible level and engaging communities in service design and delivery. And if you're lucky, a conversation about engaging communities in the management and maintenance of assets and green spaces and green infrastructure. So that is what's going on there. How that plays out at a local authority level, many of our local authorities partners will tell us, is that it does put the absolute spotlight on finding these different models of delivery within a locality, largely out of financial necessity, but also because there's a more positive agenda there about community empowerment and democratic participation and everything else. And there are some opportunities, new opportunities that weren't there before, such as local authorities' role around health and well-being and the local authority role around local enterprise partnerships and the degree to which they can build green infrastructure into some of their considerations. However, again, my view is that the pressure on budgets and services is so intense at that level, and is only going to get more intense. And the challenge of engaging communities in meaningful conversations about management and ownership of public assets is so great that actually green space at a community level tends always to come off second best in that kind of debate and that kind of argument. And I think that's just the reality of where we are. So the big question always gets asked, can business help here? Is the private sector useful in thinking about how we manage, look after and get the benefit from what are essentially public assets? The answer is absolutely yes. And it's increasingly yes, not just because that's a big stakeholder in society and in communities that needs to be engaged, but also because increasingly large businesses are becoming infrastructure and service providers in localities, in communities. They're becoming part of the fabric of how things get done. So can't be ignored, must be engaged. And again, there's lots of reasons why they might want to engage, whether it's in order to meet the provisions of the Social Value Act, or just because it helps them think through the asset management that they're responsible for and how to understand the risks attached to those assets. If they're going to do that well and creatively, they need to engage with the voluntary and community sector. And again, this is pure personal perspective on what that looks like at the moment. It's generally struggling for money, one way or another. It's pretty fragmented still, too fragmented to my mind. As budgets tighten and competition increases, that fragmentation could become pretty fractious, as we're all kind of trying to trample each other in the pursuit of funding. That's a risk. So when times get tough, you either sharpen your elbows or you lock arms and you try and go at this kind of stuff together through partnership. But that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Voluntary and community sector finds it hard to balance all of these different elements of risk in the system, but does have the capability to test and pilot and explore and try new things and join up policy agendas, join up priorities and join up budgets on the ground to make more stuff happen with the same kind of investment. So where do we go next? Faced with a problem, faced with a challenge, first thing I always do is consider whether we've been here before. And just a little bit of history for the uninitiated. This is how groundwork came into the world in 1981 as an experiment to find new ways of engaging communities and businesses in restoring and managing green infrastructure. That's what groundwork was. That's how it talked about itself. We can probably learn more from the people that made it all happen. So rooting out the archive again. A chap on the left, one or two of you may know, John Davidson, whose idea it originally was, who basically had a theory that communities should be supported and trusted to look after the places that matter to them, in a very kind of community development perspective. And the chap on the right, many of you will know, I suspect, Professor John Handley, who said that if you think carefully about green infrastructure, it can deliver both community benefit, biodiversity benefit, wider global environmental benefit, and that's just a conversation that you need to have with the people that live in that place, and that's what he set out his stall for doing. Quick note about the chap in the middle, who can claim some responsibility for all of this, and actually I think we should recognise as being someone who understood the environmental and social importance of green infrastructure. Now, whatever you think of his politics and everything else, that's a matter for you. But actually, he had that vision about how you make the connection between what the community needs and wants, what's good for the environment, and how you facilitate that dialogue. So, the picture now, and again, learning from, trying to learn some lessons from what we've been doing over the last 30 years and what we're currently doing. A couple of years ago, we set ourselves a target, which is the one on the left, to try and create or improve 1,000 bits of land somewhere in the UK to benefit 1 million people. And, you know, we thought, well, that's a nice big chunky number. That will do as our strategic target. We measured it last year and found that we'd already exceeded that number in a year. That's not necessarily because we're brilliant, though we are. I think our analysis is that it's because we've been forced to work in many, many different ways, doing things differently in order to deliver that social and community benefit linked to green space. Less of it is about what we might have been doing 15 years ago, which is large-scale land reclamation, development activities, capital projects. More of it is about what does that green infrastructure offer us in terms of a location for activities, an arena to make stuff happen, the ability to drive other social or economic benefits out of the system. Three, I just want to touch on, and this has been, you know, core to our work and the work of many other voluntary and community sector organisations for decades, recognising that green infrastructure in communities is a place where stuff happens, where people meet, where conversations can happen that don't happen otherwise. You know, 100 years ago, these conversations would have happened in the mill, in the pub, in the corner shop, in the post office. By and large, none of those things exist anymore. You now see those conversations happening in the aisles at Tesco or Sainsbury's. But actually, more of them could be made to happen in a local park, a green space, something close to where people live. And you can use that for really positive purposes. So we ran a programme for young people-friendly neighbourhoods, about getting young people thinking about their local green infrastructure, what they would do about it. And that's led on, in a number of cases, to having new models for local youth service delivery, another service area that's been massively impacted by public sector cuts. On the employment side, we've always known, and other people have always known, that there's work that needs doing, there's people that need work. And that's a basic equation that still holds true today. It gets really difficult today because of lots of issues about displacement of labour, lots of issues about unpaid labour, difficult territory about redundancies in the public sector and the dumbing down of skills. It's really difficult and treacly territory at the moment, but the basic principle still holds true. If we want large-scale retrofitting and adaptation work done, there isn't yet a market to do that. There aren't public funds available to do specifically that. If you can patch together different bits of money from different sources around welfare to work, around young people, around ex-offenders, around whatever it is, it's difficult stuff and it's contentious stuff sometimes, and you end up with people like Tebbit saying, you know, criminals should be out pulling up ragwort every weekend. If you can get past all of that, make it work properly and do it in a high quality way, you can get some real benefits. It just so happens we got a programme of European money happening in London, which is about groups of young people like this putting in SUD systems in local parks. It's a mechanism to get stuff done that otherwise couldn't get done. And then lastly, and most obviously, and I know this is going to be covered in more depth with more expertise afterwards, those green spaces in communities offer fantastic opportunities to reduce the budget pressure on the NHS by keeping more people well. That's the basic message that we're promulgating, and that's absolute fact. So whether it's education around nutrition or just a setting for physical activity or helping older people cope with isolation or chronic conditions, all of that stuff can happen. Good example for us in Cheshire, in Northwich, is that we've managed to crack the idea that a GP can give a prescription and refer a patient to an allotment site where we do kind of, you know, basic physical activity and food growing activity on an allotment site. There's no money comes with it, and that's the next thing to crack, but that's the kind of stuff that's going on. So, to bring this to a close, where we're going next. In my view, we need to get much more serious about this conversation around innovation in management models and knitting together the interests of the different sectors on that. It's far too piecemeal at the moment. There's good innovation going on, but actually the big question for me is how do you embed that good innovation across a sector that's becoming more threadbare? That's one of the challenges that we've got. Who takes up the innovation and mainstreams it? Where's the mainstream gone? It's not just about money from a political pressure point of view, but it's also about that kind of strategic positioning, strategic leadership that provides that sort of air cover that allows other people to go on and do what they need to do. And the last thing that I want to focus on is the job that people like us have increasingly, but everybody in the room has, to inspire and mobilise the public to think and care and act on this topic. Communities do care passionately about this stuff. What they don't have is enough channels through which they can express that passion. So just a couple of examples to finish with. On the stuff around new models, some of you have probably picked all this stuff up that a chap called Gareth Potts is doing out in the States. Some really interesting thought processes around communal action to manage public assets. Not all of it in the States is focused on green space. There's a lot of buildings going on there, but actually some of the core principles in there are really interesting. And if you haven't found this one in your search for new models and new ways of thinking, then I do recommend this one to you. But I also want to share some thoughts about this, interestingly enough. So I was bumped into a marketing or campaigns director at Greenpeace not that long ago, who was saying that this campaign that they ran recently was one of their most successful, both in terms of engaging the public and raising money and mobilising activity on a cause. And if you think about it, this was about encouraging people to do something around a place that they know is important. They don't really know why it's important. They've never been there and they're never likely to go there. And yet it was Greenpeace's most successful campaign in decades. And it's quite often said in our sector that we're not sexy or emotive enough to inspire that kind of cause, that kind of dedication, that kind of activity. And I'd just like to flatly disagree with that. We've got all the emotional hooks, we've got all the pull, we've got all the campaigning possibilities in this country to make a big mass public movement about parks and green spaces and green infrastructure. We're not yet doing it, and I think that's the question that we need to keep asking ourselves. How do we get traction on that big issue in the public mind?